Hello beautiful people, my name is Kristen. Welcome to my channel Moonlit Books. Today I am going to be talking about all the books that I read in the month of February. So in February I read nothing but contemporary romances. At the end of the month I did start a fantasy book, but I didn't finish it this month, so it only kind of counts for February. That is just kind of what we're in for today. We have 5 contemporary romances that I read, and the first 3 I actually did a reading vlog for, which I will link up here if you feel like checking that out. It was my first reading vlog, so it's not the best, but it does exist if you want to watch it. And I guess that's all I have to say before we dive in, so without further ado, here are the books that I read in February. So the first book that I picked up in the month of February was Spoiler Alert by Olivia Dade, and this book was so much fun. This book is based kind of in a fandom world, and it takes place partially on a forum online, which I find to be a really interesting setting. It reminded me a lot of Fangirl by Rainbow Rowell just because of that aspect of it. It follows main characters April and Marcus, who are friends on this online forum, but they don't know it. So what ends up happening is Marcus is actually the lead actor in this TV show that they are huge fans of, but it's based off of a book series, and he writes fan fiction based more off of the book series and the characters in the books and not the way that they're portrayed in the TV show. And April does this as well, and they are best friends on this online forum without knowing it. And then one day April posts a cosplay picture on Twitter and it kind of blows up. Because she's a plus size woman, her cosplay, it gets some negative comments because, the internet sucks. We hate an internet troll. But what ends up happening is Marcus, without knowing that this is April, his online best friend, he comments and says, "Oh my goodness, you're so beautiful, I would love to go on a date with you." So April and Marcus go on a date with each other, not knowing that they are each other's online best friends, and it kind of just goes from there. So eventually Marcus does discover that April is his online best friend, but he doesn't tell her who he is. So then there's this whole big secret, and it's really, honestly, the tensions were way higher in this book than I thought that they would be. But I mean, it was just, it was such a good romance. It was so interesting to kind of discover these characters and watch them discover each other, both online and in real life. And it was just really a lot of fun. It also had a lot more depth to it than just kind of this surface level romance. Both of the characters are dealing with a lot of family issues and personal issues, and it kind of takes a dive into that aspect of things as well. I just genuinely enjoyed this book. I gave it 4 out of 5 stars. I thought that it was really cute, and the characters are just so sweet, and I genuinely really enjoyed it. Alright, I think that's all I have to say about this one, so let's move on to the next. So I actually lied in the intro. They weren't all contemporary romance. This one is actually historical romance, and it is A Lady's Guide to Mischief and Mayhem by Manda. The best way that I can think to describe this is a weird combination of Sherlock and Bridgerton. If you have watched either of those shows or have any interest in either of them, I would pick this up. This book follows Catherine, who is the owner of a newspaper, and she writes kind of these stories about murders and crimes, and because it takes place in the 1800s in England, a lot of the men in the book kind of frowned upon this. They don't think that women should be involved in such heavy topics. It's not a lady's place in society to be discussing these things and talking about them so openly. There's a murder case that has been going on for quite some time. The killer has made multiple kills, and they have been leaving one of the 10 commandments on each of the bodies. So it's kind of like a little riddle to try to figure out why exactly this person was killed based on the commandment that they were left with. What ends up happening is Catherine is following this case, and she's trying to, figure out if the Scotland Yard missed any of the clues. So she ends up interviewing a woman who was there the night of one of the murders who Scotland Yard didn't end up interviewing, and it kind of opened up this whole new clue to this case. After this happens, the main detective gets taken off of the case because he missed this incredible piece of information, and the two of them kind of become enemies because of this, because he thinks that she is the reason that his career is destroyed, and she just thinks that he's kind of not the brightest detective because what the heck, he missed one of these clues. But then she goes on a trip into the country, and one of these murders that had been taking place solely in London happens in the countryside, and the detective, Andrew, ends up coming out to the countryside to kind of figure out what is going on there. and romance ensues between the two of them. So it has a little element of enemies to lovers in it. I wouldn't necessarily call them like actual enemies, they just kind of have beef with each other and they aren't super fond of each other at the beginning of this book. But it ends up becoming really interesting because the two of them start working together on this case to try to figure out what's going on and who this murderer is, and it's just very twisty and turny, and it's also just like really fun. And while I was reading it, because I had just watched Bridgerton pretty closely before reading it, I kept reading it narrated by Julie Andrews because Bridgerton is narrated by Julie Andrews. So Julie and I had a great time reading this book. We just like hung out in my brain together. It was great. I mean, it's super fun. If you're looking for like a light, easy historical fiction, I would definitely recommend this. It was a super great time. The characters were a lot of fun. The side characters were great, and I do believe that there is a second book coming out in this same universe that follows two of the side characters that have like a little thing going on in this book, which I always love. I love when an author spins off of a series with different characters than were in the first book. Overall, this was just a really fun read. I also gave this one 4 stars. It was just a lot of fun. I genuinely enjoyed the energy and the atmosphere. As someone who's a super big fan of like Sherlock and Nancy Drew, this checked those boxes for me. It was just a really fun little adventure, and I really enjoyed going on it. So yeah, that is all I have about this one. The next book that I read in February is a YA contemporary romance that actually was a new release that I was unaware was a new release when I picked it up, and that is Happily Ever Afters by Elisa Bryant. And this book, I loved this book way more than I expected to. I don't really know what I was expecting going into this book, but it was so good. Not only was this book a ton of fun, it also had a lot of aspects in it that I'm not used to seeing in YA books. This book follows main character Tessa, who is starting off at a new art school where she is in the creative writing program. And right when she starts school, she kind of goes into a huge writing slump, and she cannot write anything to save her life. Tessa is a romance writer, so she and her best friend come up with this plan that she is going to try to fall in love, to spark the flames of her writing again, so that she has more ideas of what to write about, and you know, she's kind of just back in that mindset of writing romance books. So needless to say, shenanigans ensue. There is a love triangle in this book, which usually I am not a super big fan of, but in this book I genuinely kind of enjoyed it because it felt like it was a super big learning moment for Tessa and kind of figuring out what she wanted for herself, and I genuinely really appreciated it. I just thought that it was super cute. Honestly, it reminded me quite a bit of Never Have I Ever on Netflix. If any of you have watched that, that's kind of like similar energy to what this book has. The love triangle in this book is super precious to me. It includes Tessa and the brooding bad boy of the writing department, Nico, and her sweet, sweet neighbor Sam, who is in the culinary part of this school, so he just bakes all sorts of goodies throughout this whole book, which I thought was precious. It made me so happy. It really is kind of just this whole thing where she is trying so hard to get Nico's attention, and the whole time you can kind of tell that Sam has feelings for her, and it just is, it breaks my heart a little bit, but it's so sweet at the same time. It really is just that learning period in high school when you're trying to figure out what you want and what best serves you and the people around you. Another aspect of this book that I found very interesting, and isn't something that I typically find in young adult books, is the fact that Tessa's older brother has disabilities. And it's something that is talked about throughout the entirety of this book, and the way that it is introduced and the way that Tessa talks about it was just so captivating and enlightening to me. It's something that, like I said, I haven't really seen a lot of in YA literature, so it's not something that I really have been exposed to a ton, and I was really appreciative of it being included in this story. Her family dynamic was one of my favorite parts of this book. I loved learning more about her and her brother Miles and her parents, and how the four of them kind of came together and dealt with everything that was happening in their lives. It was such a good part of this story, and while I definitely think that the main focus of it is the romance aspect, it was so nice to have that other storyline going on where I felt like I was really learning something and diving into a story that was so completely different from anything that I personally have experienced. It was just so nice to have that aspect and to be learning more about it and really taking part of Tessa's story. That is all I have to say about this one. I gave this book 5 out of 5 stars. I just thought that it was written so beautifully, and I thought that it was such a good storyline. And Tessa's character really went on such a journey throughout this book, and I really enjoyed going on it with her, so that's why it got 5 out of 5 stars. The next book that I read was one that I have had on my shelf for genuinely way too long. I think my sister read it before me. One of my really good friends read it and absolutely loved it, and he kept nagging me to read it, and I'm the type of person who, when someone tells me to do something, I don't want to do it. But I finally picked this one up, and I am so glad that I did. And that is Little and Lion by Brandy Colbert. Honestly, without knowing it, this book and Happily Ever Afters kind of have similar themes. This one I would definitely say is a more adult version of Happily Ever Afters, even though this is still, I believe, classified as YA. I definitely think that even though they have kind of similar storylines, this one takes it into a more adult direction. This book follows main characters Suzette, who is called Little by her older brother, and Lionel, who is her older brother. And this story kind of follows the two of them discovering each other and discovering more about themselves. Suzette and Lion are actually step-siblings, so I believe their parents got married when Suzette was 8 and Lion was like 9. So they were pretty close in age, but they didn't really know each other until they were almost 10. And so when we start this book, Suzette is on her way back from boarding school for the summer, and we learn that before she left, Lion was diagnosed with bipolar disorder. And while they were learning more about his bipolar disorder and what that meant for him in particular, her parents decided to send Suzette to this boarding school kind of to just give her a break from everything that was going on. So when she comes back, it's kind of this new and interesting time in her life because she had never really been away from Lion before, and now she has to come home and kind of learn this newer version of Lion, who is still her older brother and someone that she cares about deeply, but he is going through these things that she doesn't completely understand. And on top of that, Suzette is also kind of trying to figure out her sexuality. She had this secret girlfriend while she was at boarding school, and when she gets home, there's a little bit of a love triangle ensuing between her and one of her childhood best friends. He is just super sweet and wonderful, and I love him very much. And this new girl that she meets, Rafaela, who actually Lion ends up showing an interest in. So there's all sorts of kind of romantic tension drama happening, especially towards the second half of this book. Like I said, this definitely had similar energy to Happily Ever Afters, where it really dove into Suzette's personal life and her trying to figure out her feelings about these people and her sexuality, but it also really touched heavily on their home life and their family life and what it was like to be a part of this biracial step family. All of that being said, I genuinely really enjoyed this book. I did end up giving it 4 stars. It didn't quite hit that 5-star mark for me just because it was kind of really heavy. There was actually points in this book where I was very stressed and just kind of had to set it down and to take a minute to pull myself back together, which is not necessarily a bad thing. It was just not really what I was expecting going into this book, so then when it kind of got really heavy towards the end, I just needed to separate myself from it for a little bit. But I did really enjoy it. I found Suzette's character to be so engrossing and captivating, and I really just wanted her to succeed in whatever choices she ended up making in her personal life and in her family life. I just wanted her to be happy. And I really just think this book did such a great job at portraying what it's like to be going through such heavy situations in your life. As someone who is bisexual, I definitely really related to Suzette's discovery of her sexuality and kind of not knowing what she wanted or what this meant for herself. And there was a lot of this book where she was kind of like, is it just this one girl that I'm interested in? Maybe it's just a fluke, it's fine. I'll just go back to liking boys. It was this one girl and we're done and it's fine. And as she kind of figured out that that wasn't the case, I just found that to be really relatable. And it was just such a refreshing and nice narrative that I personally haven't read a ton of books with a bisexual main character, so to be reading one, especially while she was going through those struggles of figuring out her sexuality, I really enjoyed. And yeah, it was just really really nice to be seeing that part of me represented in a book. I think that's all that I have to say about this one. I genuinely really enjoyed this book. I honestly think that it's one that I would love to go back and reread again in the future, just because I feel like there is so much to be taken from this story that I probably didn't notice the first time reading it. So yeah, that is Little and Lion. And we're moving on to the last book that I read in February. It took me a while to get through this one, and I think that I had kind of put myself into an accidental contemporary romance reading slump, which is why it took me a while to get through this one, but I genuinely really enjoyed it. And that is Honey Girl by Morgan Rogers. And for those of you who don't know, I feel like this book is all over the internet right now, but for those of you who don't know, this is a debut novel that just came out this month, and I just saw so much hype about it all over the internet, and when I heard what it was about, I just knew that I needed to pick it up. The blurb of this book is incredible. It literally says, Grace Porter has her life together. She just got her PhD, and she went on a trip to Vegas, and now she's married to a girl that she has never met before. Are you kidding me? A lesbian married in Vegas storyline? There was no way that I was not picking this book up, and I'm so glad that I did. I loved this book so much, and while that little part of the blurb is what initially drew me into this story, everything that I got out of this story is so much more than that. The thing that I found really refreshing about this book is that it is a coming-of-age story about a girl in her late 20s. At the beginning of this book, Grace is 28 years old, and she just finished school, and now she's trying to figure out how to get into the real world and make a career. And this is particularly difficult for Grace because she is a mixed race girl. Her mom is white, her dad is black, and she is trying to get into the field of astronomy. And is the case with a lot of science and mathematic fields, it is particularly hard for women to break into this field. It is just a very male-dominated field, and it's even harder when you are a woman of color. Right at the beginning of this book, Grace has had an interview for this job that she kind of thought she had in the bag. Like, this was the job that she was going to have after she finished her PhD. That's always been the plan. The interview does not go as planned. She actually ends up walking out of the interview before it's finished because she just didn't feel that they were treating her in the way that she deserved to be treated. So, like, snaps for Grace. Good for you, sister. We don't have time for that. We then proceed to learn more about Grace and her family dynamics and the fact that she has kind of been pressured her whole life by her father to be the best. Never give up, just keep pushing. You can do anything and you will do anything. There is no limit to your capabilities. Like, you just have to keep pushing and you will achieve greatness. But at this point that Grace is at, she can't keep pushing anymore and she needs a break from everything. So she ends up finding the woman that she drunk married in Vegas, and she moves across the country from Portland to New York City, and they move in together. When I tell you that her new wife, Yuki, is the best character that I have ever read, I mean it. I think that Yuki was such an interesting and well-created character, and everything about her was just so interesting and so good. Watching the two of them come together and kind of work through their feelings for each other and like this craziness of the fact that they got married to each other on a drunken night in Vegas without really knowing each other at all was just such an interesting storyline. Obviously, we are so used to reading these stories of people meeting each other and falling in love, and what made this one so interesting was that even though they were just meeting each other and falling in love for the first time, they were already married, and it kind of put this weird pressure on the two of them to kind of figure out what they wanted. Will they end up staying together? Are they going to continue to be married? Are they going to get a divorce? Like, what is going to happen with these two women? It was just such a beautiful book and a beautiful story, and I am so, so glad that I read it. I ended up giving this one 4.5 stars. It didn't quite reach the 5-star mark, but again, I think that that is because I had just been reading so many contemporaries that I accidentally put myself into a contemporary reading slump, which is of no fault of this book, but it didn't quite make it to that 5-star mark for me. And I genuinely just highly recommend this to anyone and everyone. Just pick it up. It's so good. Alright, so those are all of the books that I read in their entirety in February, but I do also want to give an honorable mention to Shadow and Bone because I started this book at the end of February and I finished it like on the morning of March 1st. And if you want to hear more of my thoughts about this one before my March wrap-up, I will link my Shadow and Bone reading vlog up here. I also did a trailer reaction in that video and I was genuinely just really proud of that vlog, so if you want to check it out, that would be amazing. I think that is all I have to say in this video. Here is my beautiful little stack of books that I read this month. I genuinely enjoyed all of these books so much. I'm so glad that they all came into my life this month. I hope that you guys enjoyed this video. I had a really fun time filming it. I always enjoy reflecting back on the books that I've read a little while after I've read them. It's nice to have some time to digest them and then talk about them some more. So yeah, thank you so much for joining me on this fun little wrap-up video. I appreciate you guys being here so much, and I will see you again with another video soon. Bye!